Hello and welcome to the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation CISM Live Series. My name is Kelly and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Today we're joined by guest speaker Kevin Ellers. Kevin is the Territorial Disaster Services Coordinator for the Salvation Army in the U.S.A. Central Territory. He is also president and founder of the Institute for Compassionate Care, which is dedicated to consultation, education, and direct care, which is now run by his wife, Jennifer. Kevin is a chaplain with the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police, serves as faculty for the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, and is an adjunct professor at Olivet Nazarene University. He has extensive training and experience in crisis response, disasters, chaplaincy, pastoral ministries, marriage and family therapy, and social services. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Kelly. It's good to see you again, and welcome to all of you who are watching this on YouTube or live or wherever you're at.
This has been an incredible year, and I am personally thankful for all of you, our viewers, that have joined us each and every month for this YouTube CISM Live Series. You've interacted with us, asked us questions to our subject matter experts, and shared comments that may have helped others looking for more CISM knowledge. We're looking forward to making this series even better for you in 2022. If you have a few minutes, please click on the link in the description and fill out our survey. This is a chance to share what you're interested in learning more about in critical incident stress management. Today, we're going to discuss stress and grief during the holiday season. For some, the holiday season brings joy and laughter as we all get together and celebrate in our own ways. For others, they may experience grief over losing a loved one or are stressed as we all try to get everything ready and prepped to spend time with family and friends. So Kevin, 2020 and 2021 have been challenging in many ways. What have been your observations on how this has impacted people regarding loss, grief, and stress?
Yeah, I think in the 35 years that I've been doing grief and trauma and crisis stuff with people, this is probably unprecedented as far as the number of changes and how it's rocked just, really not just one individual community or family, but really the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
It's been crazy. It's kind of the word I find a lot of people using, when I'm talking with them, whether that's out on a disaster scene or crisis response or in my, life coaching practice. But I think one of the biggest things is we're talking about stress and we're talking about grief too. The big factor with this has been there have been so many unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I remember back in 2020, it was early March, end of February, early March. And I was heading down to do a training, and we got this, look on the news and this thing called, COVID, and we're like, what? Didn't even know what it was. And so we went down there and just like right after training, basically everything shut down that last day. And so we went back home, and about 2 weeks later, I started getting kind of sick, and we didn't know what it was at that point, because you couldn't get tests or anything. And so, the aftermath, there was just such a generalized fear that has kind of spread. And now there's a new Delta variant, now the new one that's coming from Africa. And it just created a lot of unknowns. And so, for us, a key factor is that we feel like we have some sense of control. It's really not a reality. We're really not in control of a lot of things in the world anyway, but we like to think we are, and it makes us feel safe. But with this, there's a lot of things that people just don't understand. They don't know the impacts of getting the vaccine versus not getting the vaccine, or if this is going to have short-term or long-term impacts. And so there's just a lot of insecurities that come out of that and a lot of the unknowns. And so life has really, really changed for probably most of the people that I talk to. Kind of the change of the life that we knew, how we gathered together, how we trained, how we did crisis response, how we do disaster relief, how we get together with our friends or even our family.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of losses. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that control has really added to the levels of stress specifically. And then we just have those increased levels of stressors. And the thing that I found, there's just most of the time I find with most of my clients, when I do a life audit with them, they're just kind of running under the wire anyway. right? They're trying to balance being a mom and going to school and, taking the kids to soccer, and then they got their church activities and they got their community activities, and they're like, okay, here's my threshold right here. And I'm just kind of right here, just, make sure nothing else happens. And then we have COVID happen, and boom, all of a sudden the kids can't go to school. They're staying home all the time. And now husband and wife's there in the building trying to work out of the same place. And it's just I just see these multiple stressors. And so, I used to ask people, what's stressing you out the most right now? And it'd be one or two things. Now maybe 4, 5, 6, 10, things. And so there's just that, what I call that cumulative pile up that this past year has really caused for people. And then on the other part of that, we got to look at resources, because we kind of have this, as I talk about this in the spiritual psychological first aid and the grief line trauma class, we talk about this, we have this timeline, and we have this resource thing that we look at. And so one of the things we look at when there's a critical incident that happens, we look at that, and we kind of subconsciously look and say, okay, what resources do I have to bring to face this event or incident, whatever it's come up. And so usually if it's overwhelming you can go to your best friends, your family, your church, or whatever. But here, when you look around you, there's a good probability that other resources that you have, they're in their own crisis. They're dealing with the exact same stuff that you're having. So that diminished level of resources that we typically reach out to has caused an increased level of stress. So then, where in this as the time goes on, there's that continual wear and tear that people are just getting really tired. They're tired of COVID. They want it to go away. They're tired of wearing masks. They're tired of being, so there's that sometimes, hey, what the heck? I'm just going to do it anyway. Then there's the consequences of that. And so what I sense with people, and just, last week was just a rough week. It was Thanksgiving, and I was getting ready to go to Thanksgiving. And then we had this I call it the Christmas massacre, where the guy drove through the crowd of people up in Waukesha, Wisconsin. So I'm working that thing and trying to debrief people. And then we had a shooting we're dealing with yesterday in a school. And it's just, there's like this increasing sense of anger and vitriol and volatility that you're just seeing in society. And that's even more scary, because a lot of these things that people are like, okay, it was bad enough to have COVID. Now it's like people are going stir crazy. And now where am I in danger? So that sense of insecurity is really causing a lot of stress. It's causing a lot of losses. And I don't think a lot of people are even aware of those losses. And then there's a lot of grief, but they're not even aware sometimes that it's actually grief. So that would be my long response to your short question.
Well, you definitely went into great detail, which I sincerely appreciate. So what types of losses are you seeing in your grief work with individuals and families?
Yeah, rituals are really important. And if you look at pretty much all societies, across the world, when they have these rituals that they do, they have these celebrations, they have these whatever they call it, whether it's a death or whether it's a graduation, whatever, there's these times or transitions, and they're celebratory things, or they're grieving things that we do, and we usually do it together. I think we as human beings are designed to be in community. It's not just humans, animals are, well, I see it with my horses and the cats and the chickens, they kind of flock together, they do their thing. When you separate them, they start getting anxious. And we as human beings really feel that, especially, some of my friends and clients who are single. That's been a really rough time for them, especially in those early times of COVID, where they literally were restrained to their apartments and couldn't get out. Like in Chicago, some of the downtown Chicago areas, you weren't really supposed to hardly leave that area, And so it's been really tough. So what's happened, there's been a lot of compromised rituals, compromised celebrations, kids who are graduating from high school and didn't really get to have the celebration graduation they usually had. They had to have a drive-by graduation, people wave from the car. People have died alone. People have not had the chance to say in person, face to face goodbye. People have had to stand outside the nursing home windows and wave at mom as they took their last breath. That's just tore people's heart out. And so that diminished person contact has really had, I think, far more impact on people than we really realize. And this is especially true for people like her more extroverted, because extroverts refuel by being around people. So the introverts were kind of like happy for a while to kind of get away and have their own stuff, but the extroverts, that's really, really hard for them because they refuel by being with other people. And so then you have that, then the losses are the multiple compounded losses. Okay, so what happened, first of all, I watched, my sister even go through this, is that their work, they went from being in the office, and she's single, and she had her friends around her all the time, and she'd decorate her cubicle for Christmas, and everybody would come by and get coffee and talk. Well, now they're all working from home. And that's been a huge loss from her, because now she's just home by herself with her cat, and she couldn't decorate, for Christmas there, and people aren't getting together at the restaurants like they used to. And it was just, as we were talking the other day, there was just loss after loss after loss. And she hadn't even realized it, because I started my conversation by saying, hey, what are the losses that you've experienced? And so it's really, really tough.
So for many people, what do you think are some of the things that people don't understand about grief?
Okay, I think we have to start back where we just talked about. You can't grieve what you haven't lost. Okay. Right. And so in the grief class, we talk about this a lot. There's a difference between grief and mourning. And I want to just kind of take a real quick, just to kind of flesh that out a little bit. So grief are those things that we experience. And most of the time when people think of grief, they think of grief as feelings, and mostly sad feelings. And that definitely is a huge part of grief. But grief is also impacts on the brain, the impacts on the heart, how we feel, the impacts on the body, so we can experience grief in many different ways. In fact, some people have had losses that nobody else has recognized, not even themselves. This is when I sometimes have these conversations with people, and I ask them that question, and I start digging a little bit deeper. All these losses start coming out, and they're like, dang, no wonder I'm so out of sorts, because there's been a lot of stuff, and nobody has ever stopped to ask them that, nor have they stopped to ask themselves. And so they're kind of carrying around all this stuff. They're impaired in their brain. I call it, we have grief brain sometimes, and then nobody's been around to really process with. And then we're carrying all this stuff in our heart. So the feelings and the emotions. And then sometimes we carry that somatically in our body. And a lot of times we have that grief. So sometimes people haven't even noticed that they're feeling sad. They may present as maybe being angry or agitated or just withdrawing. And really a lot of that I find actually is grief. And so you have to help people recognize, acknowledge those losses, and then help them to really embrace those feelings and those emotions. And so a lot of times we don't really have a language for that, especially a lot of men, a lot of places in our emergency response culture, we work really hard to shut a lot of this stuff down, right? We want to keep our head in the game. We want to keep focusing forward like that. So we don't have time to mess with those feeling things. Well, emotions are an internal built design for us as human beings, and you better pay attention to those emotions. We have them, animals have them. I do equine assisted therapy, life coaching with my horses, and they are so in tune with that, with people's emotions. When people walk up, I can just sense. I can have 5 people walk up to the same horse, and that horse will have a different interaction with each one of them. And so it's really fascinating. But horses do, and they pick up on some of those emotions, and they're able to tune right into that. So emotions are a good thing. And this is one of the things, especially my guys in law enforcement, gals in law enforcement, emotions are okay. It doesn't mean that you're a wimp because you're having emotion or a feeling. We have to acknowledge those things and allow ourselves to identify that, and then to be able to, then we can start being able to grieve those losses. So I think
it's interesting that you mentioned specifically, it being something that you have to ask individuals to really dig in and think about, because oftentimes, like, a lot of those experiences are kind of unconscious. Like, you don't really think about all of the things that pile up within the scope of things that we may be grieving or having a loss over until we actually ask those difficult questions. So I think that that's fascinating, and it's a great practice, I think, for anyone to employ.
And I didn't think the second part of that too. So grief are those things that we experience. Again, grief, one of the biggest things in my classes I teach, grief is more than an emotion. So then the other part of that is then mourning. Okay. And I know we just take letters together and put them and make them into Word, and then we figure out how to pronounce them, and then we sign a meaning to them. But there is a difference between that. So mourning is what you do with that grief, what you do with those emotions, what you do with those feelings. And so this is what has been compromised, is the mourning rituals have been compromised. We can't go to the funeral. We can't have the in-person, celebration of life, when we wanted to. We may want to do it right then. We have to wait for 6 months till we can get back together. So there's mourning ritual. So, the mourning, you may not be able to experience or control the grief. And I don't even try to. Those are emotions or feelings or whatever you're experiencing inside. But the mourning are things that you have control over. So what are those mourning rituals? Getting together. If you can't have an in-person, celebration of life, then make sure you do something on Zoom. Or do something. And if you can't have 100 people there, make sure you do something significant with 4 or 5 people. And that's the one thing that I've had to tell people, that you've got to do something. We as humans need those transitions. We need those celebrations. We need this time to mourn and grieve together. So that's a real practical thing, is tell people to really think it through. Okay, you can't do A, then let's consider B and C. What else can you do?
Of course, yeah, and there's always another option to consider. So for many people, this will be the first holiday season without somebody. How can we help them through this time?
Yeah, this is a really, really big one. And I really encourage people to be strategic with this. First thing is to help families to really embrace all those emotions that they're having. Okay. If that's fear, if it's sadness or whatever, denying it doesn't help. The way I talk about this all the time is, you go to the beach, you've got that beach ball. If you try to stuff it down the water, you can hold it for a little bit, but then a wave comes or something distracts you, and it's going to just come up and smack you in the face. And that's kind of what grief is like. And so we go into these holidays, I really challenge people to think about it strategically, give some thought to it. This was a hard, my family always celebrates with my sisters, my siblings. We celebrate Christmas at Thanksgiving, because now that we are all grown and we have kids, nobody wants to travel during the Christmas holidays because it's in Chicago. You probably get a snowstorm or something. So we celebrate Christmas and Thanksgiving. So when my dad died, it was very, very, very hard. And so Dad was a very central role in Christmas, and he always did set at the head of the table for the meals at Thanksgiving, and then he always did the prayer, and he passed out the presents, and I just knew coming up that first Thanksgiving / Christmas for us, that was going to be really hard. So, I pulled my sisters together and said, hey, let's talk about this. What are we going to do? And so what we did is, before we started that day, we just kind of sat down and said, let's talk about Dad. It's obvious he's not here. There's an empty chair, and that's really very obvious. And so we spent some time talking about how that made us feel as far as sadness or whatever those emotions were. And then I did a little bit of a shift, and I asked them to start remembering some of the things that we were blessed by having him as our father. And so, so some of those things embrace all emotions, than what we may consider as negative, which are not really negative. They just are. They're sad, they hurt, and then the positive as well. And so that whole element of doing the holidays, I really challenge to, allow yourself to experience that sadness, that missing that person or whatever it is, then to do something to mourn it. Let the kids draw a picture or write something to Papa, but take time to really remember and give thanks and give gratitude for that. That's a huge thing. Another thing that I really encourage people to do is, I was meeting with one of my friends and colleagues one time. She wrote a great book, September Vajri. She does a lot of grief work, and her teenage daughter had died suddenly in a car accident. And it was just devastating for them. And so when it came up to a certain celebration for her, it was Mother's Day, she had a decision, because she knew that was going to be a very hard day for her, because one of her daughters had died. But she still had another daughter and a son still living, who were having this. And so the question that she had is, how am I going to handle this day? I have a living daughter and I have a dead daughter, and I want to have sadness and rejoicing at the same time. So how am I going to do that? So she thought about this, and she came up with the concept that I love. She called it pre-grieving. And so what she did, she went with one of her friends to the graveside a couple of days before, and she had her sad Mother's Day a few days in advance with her dead daughter, and it was remembering her and thanking her and just having her morning rituals. And then when it came time for Mother's Day, then she was actually able to celebrate it and give life to the daughter she still had living. It's something that I hear a lot from the families when I'm working with them in grief. I have kids say, it was bad enough that my brother died or my sister died, but then I feel like I lost my mom too, because they were so lost in their grief, they just feel forgotten and abandoned. So yeah, so really give some thought to that. And sometimes you may have to think about that, maybe a pre-grieving or having a celebration, and then the sadness pieces of that, but just think it through, and I think you can come up with a solution.
And I think sharing your personal testimony about what you and your family did with regard to sharing stories of loss of the loved one that you had lost really ties in nicely, especially as we all come together during the holiday season as a way to help with that loss.
Yeah. So yeah, we talked about some of the practical things that we can do to help the grieving and things like that. But, I have what I call the 3 S's. In the spiritual psychological first aid course, I have these 10 P's of being present and, protecting people and practical assistance. But before I came up with those 10, I had 3 S's that kind of gave me guidance. It was show up, shut up, and serve. And so, that's the question is, how can you show up with people when you can't be there in the way that you want to, to show up with people when you can't be there physically? Can you show up emotionally? Can you do some of this other stuff in it may be a different way? And so you may have to get creative with that. This past year, I know a lot of people have done this, but I started having Zoom dinners with my daughter, with my daughters, and so we would do that, and we would eat our pizza together and talk and that type of stuff. It wasn't quite the same, but it was better than not getting together, and right. So, and the other thing was is to shut up. I think what that really means is just be with and really listen. If you're trying to help somebody through this, is to honor them and just say, how has that been without your dad this year? And to really to kind of hold sacred space for them. And then the big piece of this is practical thing is really serving people. If you know that, they've lost their loved ones, and, maybe this, the mom's a single mom and the husband's dead and they have kids, it's going to be hard for her to hang the lights and put up the Christmas tree and that type of stuff. I had one woman, her husband had died. He was like 35 years old, and he was shocked at an electrocution thing. And she was having a rough time. He had died, I think it was around July or August. And so we came up time for Christmas, and she just was in a bad place. And she had decided they were sad and they were going to skip Christmas. And so she basically told her kids' dad. Some of her friends were like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. So they came over to the house and said, we're going to decorate the tree. So this was like their best friends. And so the other husbands came and they pulled the stuff out of the garage. They put up the Christmas tree. They hung the lights. They did the whole thing. And, she wasn't in the mood to do it. And she came back later when I asked her, what was one of the most positive things that helped you? She said, them coming and doing that. She said, they knew that my kids need to have Christmas, and I was in no way, shape, or form able to do that. And so, that was like a really cool thing. So, figure out how can I show up for this person? How can I be there? We can't do A, but maybe we can do B or C. And people, that is the one thing that people remember the most. I've been following people with my camera for about 20 years now, doing video interviews with people. And one of the things I always ask them, what helped the most? And then what was hurtful? And the things almost always they mentioned were helpful things that people did that were practical. They remember it. Very, 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 very important. So, and the other thing I want to say is for practical things is remember their loved ones. A lot of times people are very reluctant to bring up. So maybe with my dad, somebody might say, oh, I don't want to bring up, Kevin's dad dying because then it might make him sad. Trust me, I'm thinking about it during the holidays. And so, we who are grieving appreciate somebody says to you, hey, I remember when I was going to a conference after that, and one of my colleagues from another organization said, hey, I hear you're going to be at this conference. I'm going to be there too. She said, I'm so sorry. I heard your dad died. She said, I know that's a significant loss for a man. And she said, when we get to the conference, she said, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your father and how he shaped your life. And I've never forgot that, because that was so significant. So people, one of the biggest things they fear is that they will forget and other people will forget. And so it's really important to remember that loved one. Say, hey, I remember when we were kids, your dad took us fishing. Those type of things are really important. So, and then the last thing I want to say about some practical things is really encourage people to cultivate gratitude and thankfulness.
Mm.
That I'm not saying doing that in lieu of being, sad. I'm saying you do both. So one of the things that we know in the grief research, it is possible to be sad and have joy at the same time.
Mhm.
I was working with a lady a couple of years ago, and her son had died. And so she came, she was sitting there after the funeral, and they were having, the thing everybody gets together and at their church. And she said, I was sitting by the fire and I remembered our son. And she said, all of a sudden I had been feeling so incredibly sad. She said, all of a sudden I remembered the great kid that he had been. She said, I had this moment of joy. And she said, I was very confused by that. I went to my husband and I told him, and he said, sweetie, hold on to that because you're going to need it. And so she had told that story because in class I had talked about how you can experience sadness and joy at the same time, and so sometimes we alternate back and forth, so you can experience both. And so cultivate that gratitude and that thankfulness. Just I was talking a little bit ago earlier when I was working that massacre up there at the Christmas parade. I was angry. I just found myself feeling so angry that somebody could do that, and just all the devastation. I've been hearing everybody's stories, and I hadn't really processed it yet. So I'm sitting at McDonald's, and it's like a day before Thanksgiving, I think, starting to tear up a little bit. And I wasn't in a good place. I was just angry and just like I wanted to grab a gun and go do something to him. Not proud of that moment. And my moment of weakness. And all of a sudden I hear this little voice. And there's this little girl in McDonald's. And she was singing this little song. She's like, thankful. And she was singing this thankful song. And she was a girl who had Down syndrome. And she had the sweetest little look on her face. And I just stopped there. And I held my sadness. And I held my anger. And I held my rage where I wanted to do something to this guy who would cause so much harm to people. And then I stopped. And I remembered the things I was thankful for. And I left and I walked over to the family and I said, thank you for singing your song. And so I think she was preparing it to sing in church or something. But it was a moment in time. And I think, when the world falls apart and we are hurting, I think we have to stop to kind of reorient ourselves, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times we get caught up in it. We get caught up in everything that's going on in the world, and I think we have a choice, right? So I talk to this with my clients a lot of times. We have that choice to either get bitter or better. I've heard so many of my clients say that in life. And so, how we come alongside somebody else in our own pain and our sorrow, can give them permission. After my divorce, it was a really tough time for a couple of years, just not being able to see my daughters as much. And I was doing a seminar one time and I was talking about that. I had like 500 people show up in my workshop. And we were talking about losses, and I just briefly talked about the losses that I had through the divorce and being alone and that Christmas holiday after that. And so many people came up to me afterwards and said, thank you for talking about that. So, you don't want to hijack somebody's story and make it about yourself. But when you share something from your own past, sometimes remember, limited self-disclosure. So you may go up to somebody and say, hey, I know it's going to be tough for you. I don't know how you're feeling, but I went through a divorce a couple of years ago. Holidays are tough. That's all you need to say. They know that you get it. So cultivate and stop to think about the things that we're gratitude and thankful at the same time, holding sacred space for the feelings and emotions that we experience inside. Both are important.
I appreciate you sharing those practical things that we can do each and every day to try and help with the grieving or help with the grieving process, not just for ourselves, but for others, our family members and within the community. And I sincerely appreciate you sharing your personal testimony with regard to recent events. You made me cry just by going through, all of that. So, oh goodness, it's definitely good to experience all of those emotions. And you're right, it is true to experience both sadness and joy. I know with me personally, that's been something that I've done throughout the years, suffering through loss, just like everyone. So there is a moment where you do experience both those at the same time. As we all know, loss is very hard. Are there any positive things about loss and grief that you can share?
Oh, wow. There are so many positive things. A number of years ago, I was sitting with a marriage and family therapist. This is how I started out as a marriage and family therapist. And she was asking what I did. And I was telling her about the work I did with grief and mostly trauma now. And she's looked at me and she's like, I don't know how you do that. And I said, do what? She said, work with the grief. And I said, why is that? She said, she stopped for a minute. She said, because you can't fix grief. And I looked at her and I said, well, the beauty of it, what I understand now is I don't have to fix grief. You know, you can't, grief is not something that you can fix. It's something that you have to learn to experience. And one of the things I like about working people with grief and trauma is, you know, all societies, this whole stuff in the news about being woke, right? As the buzzword right now. What does that mean to racism, to social injustice, and all that type of stuff? But, you know, I've been using the term not woke, but awakening for many years. It's been a big thing within the kind of the faith movement, and it's basically early monasteries and the desert fathers and people, of that element of awakening, you know, awakening to the world and awakening to who we are within that world. It's really, really important. And that's kind of one of the big things I do now as a life coach, is help people to really look at their lives and put it in a context of that. So that whole part of grief can be a powerful catalyst. It's kind of those things that sometimes, you know, I look back, I got hit by a car and almost died. I got, you know, going through the divorce. And those two things were probably the biggest things that actually to wake me up to life, to a greater sense of gratitude, you know, a greater sense of meaning. And I think if you can get in touch with that, you can not only just survive loss, but you can actually grow from it. And some of the most beautiful people I know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about this, and I had this in my grief class. You know, she talks about the beautiful people are the one who've known defeat, known sorrow. I don't have it memorized, but she walks through that and says that these are the things that really kind of can create that beauty from people. And so yeah, there's a lot of positive stuff. I think for me, if I look about myself and people I'm working with through this, those who have faced into their grief, faced into their loss, acknowledge it, have a great capacity for growth and coming out on the other side, not just standing, still standing, but actually growing from it. And I always talk about that. There's a part of being a victim, and then there's becoming moving into being a survivor. But there's a step beyond that. A lot of people don't understand, and that is being a thriver. And we talk about that in terms of post-traumatic growth. And we hear a lot of people talking about resilience. Resilience is kind of the ability to bounce back. Post-traumatic growth is a step beyond resilience. And so I think grief has a way of waking us up. You know, I am so, having gone through the stuff I've gone through in life, I have a much greater appreciation of Jennifer now that I'm remarried, and we've been 10 years now. And I love that woman, you know, mistakes, aware to the mistakes I made for in the you know, marriage, and thankful for my time with my girls that I have, thankful for my family, even with COVID. That I was able to find a lot of that stuff and find some powerful things in there to help even internal growth. So the other positive stuff about that, it can really prompt people to have forward movement. And so much, especially as a coach, is people get stuck, and they don't even a lot of times realize, sometimes they don't even realize they're stuck, first of all. And then something happens, like a loss or something, kind of wakes them up to that. And then they start being aware of it, but then they don't know what to do. They try the same old things. And so as a coach, really help them to understand that every person's unique, and their journey is unique, and their losses are unique, and their growth movement after that is going to be unique too. And so, you know, I think it's about helping them to be gentle with themselves, to extend grace to themselves, but to wade into that and understand that these are transition moments. And like I said, you can become bitter or you can become better, but you can grow and become a more healthy human being because of these losses. And so that's why I'm finding people. And so helping people to look at that. I think the problem we get with this sometimes is we as helpers want to push people too forward too quickly. You know, it's like, okay, you're stuck. Let me help you push you. Let me drag you out of your quagmire of self-pity. Well, that doesn't really work. You know, everybody's got their own journey. They got their own time. They got their own perception of that. And so my job is really as a companion, as a coach, not as a grief expert or a grief counselor, but as a grief coach, you know, come alongside to help them. Okay, where are you at? You know, where would you like to be? And how can we walk with you and help others to walk with you to see forward movement? I think forward movement is that key term that I want people to look at, whatever that looks like for them. Do they feel like there's some forward movement? And so that's a big part of
that. A visualization that just came to me as you were talking about that was literally standing side by side next to somebody and walking with them rather than taking them by the arm and dragging them forward. There's two different mentalities that come along with that.
Yeah. I think it's really, we'll talk about this in the next section, I think about being present with people. But I think that element of really coming to sit in the darkness with them, and I think that's where, when we can tap into our own pain and our own loss and our own stuff that we have had, and we're in touch with that, then it allows us to have that greater levels of empathy and compassion to come alongside somebody else in that pain. We understand it better, so as long as we've done our healing. Henry Nouwen talked about this as the wounded healer. Right, the wounded healer still has scars. They're not bleeding all over everybody, but they still have the scars to show it. And I think people really appreciate that. When I think about this in terms of when I'm going on a vacation, I love YouTube, because I want to get on YouTube and I want to say, hey, hiking the Grand Canyon, what to do, what not to do, right? I want to hear from people who've been there. I want people who went down to the bottom and came back up, and made it back out, not on the back of a donkey, dead or something. So, you want to hear that from people. So, sharing that and being able to connect people with different pieces of that and others who have gone through similar things can be really, really helpful. The whole element of peer support, right? That's what ICSF does great, is linking people with people who understand it from their perspective. So one thing before I stop this section is talk about understanding. I tell people, never say I understand how you feel, because you don't. And so another thing that I encourage people to say is if you have something similar you've gone through, let's say your child dies and then this person has a child die, don't say I know how you feel, because you don't, but you can say, hey, I don't know how you feel, but I've walked a similar journey. And so, so that people want to know, all you have to do is limit the self-disclosure. Sounds like this: I am so sorry, your daughter died. My daughter died 5 years ago too. And it's the toughest thing they ever went to. And then shut up. That's all you need to say. If they want to know more, they'll ask more, but it lets them know as, hey, I've been through something. You're not hijacking their story by talking for the next 2 hours about your loss. It's just saying, hey, I've been there. It's tough.
Well, stress affects everyone differently and can often be tougher than usual during the holiday season. What are some tips that you can provide to our viewers for handling stress as we go through all of this?
Yeah. So one of the things I really talk a lot about these days is what grounds you. And now, I think grounding can mean different things for different people. There's people who literally electronically ground themselves by standing on, these electronic mats and wires. And, for me, it's like standing on the earth, taking my shoes off, but it's whatever centers you and helps you connect with yourself and the universe and God and others around you. But you have to be able to figure out what grounds you. So kind of my story of this, about 3 years ago, one of my friends convinced me to go to a monastery for a week with some other leaders to work on ourselves, on our own stuff. And so I was kind of reluctant to do it, but I think he was seeing the signs and realized I needed to do it, because I'm a person who's always filling my plate, and others' plates with everything, and we're always running, behind and doing more stuff than I could possibly do in a day. As you know, getting back with your emails and stuff. But so I went down there, and one of the things that they really pushed us to do and to think about was 3 concepts of seeking solitude, cultivating silence, and then stillness. And so these are not 3 things that I had really ever done a lot of. It's just, I was always around people, and I was strong extrovert, and I'm always connecting with people. But I really started doing that. They made us experience that. They would put us out in the woods for half a day and give us something to think about and reflect on. And I liked it. It didn't feel very good at first, and I'm like looking at the birds, and all my ADD's kicking in, and the squirrels, literal the squirrels. And so I'm out there with it, but I really began to really cultivate those practices in my life. And this is like going into the 1819 year. And so interesting, when COVID hit in 2020 and all of a sudden we were literally grounded out here, it was a very different experience, because I had bought a farm out here and I'd got the horses and started my equine assisted, practice with coaching and therapy and stuff. And it was actually, I hate to say this to people because I feel bad, it was one of the best years of my life in 2020, because I had that foundation of being able to do that in a context to put this in. So it really allowed me to practice some of these things. I mean, sometimes I was really, really busy, but I was able to stay home with my wife and stay and spend time with the horses. And so it's been a really interesting, I was almost forced into that. And so it's probably been one of the best years of my life for personal growth, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. And so that's kind of like, I really encourage people in the middle of all the chaos and there's stuff constantly pulling for attention and all these things going on, is just stop, be silent, and be still, and to seek that solitude some, and then to reconnect with people as well. So that's kind of a big piece of those. The other thing is I really encourage people to do is, the research is so clear. We do a stress capacity and resilience course that we do for 2 days with people. And when I started doing the research on exercise and just showing how important it was, you don't have to go do a huge bodybuilder workout at the gym. I have a 3 to 4 mile walk that I do out across here. We live across from a nature preserve. And so that's my prayer, meditation, reflection, kind of centering time. And it's made a huge difference. Somebody asked me the other day, is how do you have time to do that? I said, how do I have time not to do that? Because it's made a huge difference. So I'm exercising and doing the whole kind of spiritual and emotional kind of reset thing. That's actually what I call it reset life coaching, reset rants, RESET, capital life, because it's like we need to reset. And so a lot of times we wait for the big vacation in Hawaii every 5 years, or the time on the beach, or the 1 week vacation. No, you need to reset monthly. You need to reset weekly. You need to reset daily. And I would even challenge you, on some days I have to reset hourly. So at work, we've got this little pond outside, and a little pond. Sometimes I just go out and just walk around for 10 minutes, walk up and down the stairs for 10 minutes. It's amazing how that can really reset you. Second thing is you got to get sleep. And so with all the holiday stuff, sometimes we end up kind of shortchanging ourselves. If you look at the research, Matthew Walker does incredible research on sleep. And so you will pay the piper for that. And so make sure you're exercising, make sure you're getting sleep. And then we talked before about walking. You need to be in nature some. You need some times where you're away from all the stimuli. The Japanese call it forest bathing. I don't really like the term. I call it forest immersion. But you're immersing yourself in there. And it's amazing how that can really reset you. So being strategic with time, one of the things I really encourage you to do is really do a life audit. I make my clients do that in coaching all the time. I want them to do a life audit. Sometimes I'll literally have them mark out the whole day. Where are they spending their time? And sometimes they're really shocked at where they think they're spending time and where they are. And so I think, as looking through this year and this grief and the losses, sometimes, give us time to really look at life strategically, and then to begin to invest in that. Relationships are important. Some people don't have a choice. They don't have a spouse. They don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend. They can't be with their family across the country. But, animals can give that back to you. I heard your dog barking a while ago. I got a rooster outside crowing and a cat outside the door. But animals, they do so much stuff with building oxytocin and all that stuff, can really help to do that. So, it's to allow your time to really sit there in the silence with them, and to do that so powerful. So I guess if I can kind of wrap this up, the question that I had is maybe the best present. Talk about presents, coming this holiday season. The best present that I would say to you that you can give yourself is to be present. To be present with yourself, be present with your animals, be present with your spouse, be present with your friends, but just being present in that moment. And I think for many years I was always waiting until I got the master's degree, or I got my doctorate degree, or I did this, or I had that, and I lived in the future. Or sometimes I got stuck in the past. And I was like, all the anger, and this person did this to me, or this, and the grief and the loss. And honestly, what I have learned, and this is what I've learned from being with the horses, and I think this past year has just reaffirmed that more. Horses don't live there in the front or in the back. Horses are good at living in that parasympathetic state and being in the present right now, right? They're not thinking about, oh, I sure wish I had, different hay, or, I wish I had a different master, or I can't believe, that last ride we did 2 weeks ago, that saddle was hurting me. No, if it's something they're experiencing right now, they experience it, and if it's a danger, they'll protect themselves from it. But they just live in that. And you can tell when a horse is in that parasympathetic state because they lick, they chew, they cock their hind leg. You can tell they're in that relaxed state. So I guess my question to you as caregivers, or where you're at, are you living in a sympathetic state, which is that flight, fight, or freeze state, which a lot of us as first responders do, or have you learned to really live in that parasympathetic state and being present in life? And so that would be my challenge to you. That's the best gift that you can give, not only to yourself, but to those in your life, is being present. Because if you're present in life, and you will be present for others and for yourself, and you will have higher levels of joy and satisfaction with life.
Those are all wonderful practical tips for dealing with stress, not just as we come into the holiday season or continue through it and the end of the year, but I think those are practical tips that you can actually apply year round, regardless of what time of year it is. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll have some tips that we can have people some handouts, some PDFs too. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
And then on that website, the Reset Life Coaching, I have some stuff on there as well on the resource section. So.
And we'll make sure to include that in the description of the video as well, so that way people can reference and go there too. Thank you, Kevin, for joining me today to discuss stress and grief during the holiday season. If you, our viewers, have enjoyed our discussion today and would like to learn more tips about helping others with stress and grief, Kevin has put together a helpful PDF for you to download. This PDF is free, and you're welcome to share it with your coworkers and peers. As we all know, stress and grief can be tougher than usual during this holiday season. The ICISF team has cultivated several free resources to help individuals, peers, and families. We have free handouts that focus on tips for dealing with stress for families and friends, an instant relaxation exercise, and methods to enhance our resilience. You can learn more and download these resources under CISM handouts at ICI.org/resources. We also offer a variety of stress management, emotional and spiritual care, resilience, and grief following trauma courses, several of which are by our very own Kevin Ellers. To learn more and register for these courses, you can visit our website, icisf.org/remote-learning. If you're looking for additional resources on psychological body armor, self-care, delivering bad news, you can get all of these items through the ICISF app. This app allows you to download digital resources directly to your mobile devices for reference anytime you wish. To learn more and get these resources today, you can visit app.ici.org. Now, all of the links for all of these resources, including the free PDF from today's discussion, are available in the description below. If you liked today's discussion, be sure to give this video a thumbs up or even leave a comment in the description. We want to wish everyone a wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you in 2022 for our next CISM Live series. Until then, we'll see you then.
Thanks, Kelly.